Welcome to the Ellevate podcast, conversations with women changing the face of business. And now your hosts, Kristy, Wallace, and Maricella, Herrera.
Hello and welcome to the Ellevate podcast. This is your host, Kristy Wallace, excited to talk about our guest today, Lea Goldman, who is the Chief Content Officer of 1920 Media. She's got an amazing story to tell and just such personality and insights and perspectives that hail from her years being in media and entertainment and really looking at how the stories we tell shape lives. Thank you so much for joining us today on the Ellevate podcast.
Thank you for having me.
I am really excited for this conversation. We have so many things to talk about.
Yeah, we have a lot of ground to cover.
We do. So let's set the stage. And we'll do that by just hearing a little bit more about your background, if you wouldn't mind sharing.
Sure. I am a longtime media person who has recently transitioned into entertainment. I started my career at Forbes magazine. I was a reporter and then an editor. And, by the end of my run there, I'd been there a decade. I was the chief listicler. I was working on and heading up a lot of their big marquee lists, like the billionaires list, the top celebrity lists. After that, I went to Maricella, which was a totally different pivot. I decided I wanted to try something different and worked. It was the first time I'd gone from working with all men to working with all women at Maricella, where I was ultimately the executive editor of that magazine and helped launch their At Work section, which I'm super proud of. And then after that, I went to Refinery 29, where I ran their newsroom under the brilliant visionary Amy Emmerich, and then was recruited to work at Lifetime Television as their first editor-in-chief, building out an editorial operation at a TV network, which will be the subject of a memoir at one point. And having seen firsthand how entertainment gets made, I decided that really was my passion. I'm a creative at heart, and I've now gone out on my own to write for TV and film.
Wow. Oh my gosh.
That's me.
That is exciting.
Thanks.
Well, and you've touched upon so many industries that have, one, evolved quite a bit. If you look at where TV was back 20 years ago, and it was just the cable TV shows, and now we've got a wide array of TV. We've talked a lot about media and the transition of that industry from print to digital and everything in between. Do you have predictions for the future? Like, what's the next big thing?
So I'm going to subject you all to my 2-minute TED Talk, because having worked on both sides, in media and then in entertainment, where the term content is used interchangeably on both sides, I can tell you firsthand that is not the case at all. In fact, content considerations and decisions and, all sorts of key business decisions are made very differently in the media world and in the entertainment world. People think, it's all the same. How a bill becomes a law is all the same. In fact, they're very different. In media, it's driven entirely by what's new. We know the media industry is driven not just by news, but what's fresh, what's current, Hollywood, celebrity, movie, film, fashion, music. Entertainment is not driven by those things. Entertainment is driven by what works, what has already proven to be profitable. And so that's why you tend to see the same formats on television, the same constellation of stars on television and in film, because the cost of entry is so much higher for TV and film that they can't take the risk on what's new, whereas media is entirely driven by what's new. So having come from the media world into entertainment, that was a bit of a shocker for me to, have people in media have this DNA to, just kind of chase whatever's the hot thing. They want to explore it, recreate it, dissect it, understand it, and publish it. Not so on the entertainment side. And so that was a difficult transition to make, but also a valuable one because, it taught me how and why entertainment can be so kind of vanilla and mass, and media right now is in this niche moment where, all these different audiences are being targeted by different media operations. And so now we live in a moment where media is now pursuing entertainment, We
Yes.
have all these media companies trying to build
I
their
mean,
own original
sometimes
series.
I'm reading media and I think it is entertainment.
Right. And then you have all these entertainment companies who are getting into the media business, right? Who will win? Who will win out? Is it the media companies who will be more successful at entertainment, or will it be the entertainment companies who find success in media? I don't really know. I'm not a predictor, but and I'm a little biased, but I tend to think the media muscle is a little more weathered by the whole experience. We fail fast because it was cheap and dirty to fail. You know what I mean? You could make those mistakes and learn from them very quickly because the cost was so marginal. Entertainment, not so much. And so they're slower. All the decision making is much slower. So I tend to think media might be more successful at that effort than entertainment, which is a long-winded way of saying I have no idea, but my money's on media.
It's really fascinating. I want to touch on something you said about your time at Forbes, and you were the chief listicler.
I mean, that wasn't my title, but that's what they called you.
I mean, it's fascinating, this obsession we have with lists, and a previous company I worked at had a million different lists as well, and everyone loves them, and it's an easy way to kind of digest information, who's on that list and what does that mean, and give that type of ranking in different categories. I'm interested to know about your thoughts on 100 Most Innovative Leaders list. And this got a lot of attention on social media because there was only one woman on that list of 100 Most Innovative Leaders of 2019. And so one might ask, how exactly does that happen? And what does your experience tell you about that?
It's been many years since I worked at Forbes, so my insight is obviously is not born of any insider information. I haven't been there in a long time, but I can tell you how it worked when I was there. So first of all, there are two kinds of lists. There are, for lack of a better term, objective lists and subjective lists. And the objective lists are basically catalogs of people's wealth. So the world's billionaires list and the Forbes 400 come to mind because they're essentially just calculating people's wealth. Yes, there's a little art to that. Famously, Donald Trump used to call into Forbes every year and push for a certain valuation. And, later on that would result in a lawsuit because the valuation was lower than what he said it was. So there is a whiff of art to that, but for the most part, the idea is that the valuations on those things will be comparable to the way banks evaluate assets. A vineyard is worth this much, a mansion is worth that much, generally. And then there are the ones that are more subjective, the most powerful people, the most innovative leaders. Those things are, when I was at Forbes, the idea was that there would be a methodology that you would hew, and that methodology would somehow be rooted. There was an algorithm that would be rooted in math. So you would factor in a person's net worth or a person's income into those things. But most innovative leaders, it's hard for me to imagine what that methodology would look like other than, say, calling around, right? So presumably, I would imagine the editor called around, the team of reporters called around and culled this list of leaders. And look, I'm probably not adding any sort of fresh insight here that hasn't been said or written before, but what I find fascinating and telling about the results of that list were that it didn't, I'm sure there were a small orbit of people that were involved in the making of that list. The editors, the publishers, the fact checkers, Forbes still has fact checkers, the designers, the copy editors, the photo editors. So there's an orbit of people that's more than a handful that have eyes on that list. And the fact that no one threw up a flag and said, hey, Houston, we have a problem here, I think is telling about the people that were in that circle. But also, even if there were women in that circle, the culture that says that there's nothing wrong here, there's nothing for us to flag as being problematic, which is curious given that the organization has a women's division. It has a successful conference for women. It had at one point a magazine for women. It has one of the Forbes daughters is very much a leader in that organization. So it's curious to me that the culture would allow that in an organization where you would think women figure prominently. And it tells me that maybe, in fact, they don't. Or, sure, it could have been a blip, but it does raise certain questions about culture more than process, I think.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I know that Forbes had come out and issued an apology and whatnot around it. But I think that there's, more to be seen in the future and how that changes in future lists.
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing was mind-blowing, especially given the nature of it, most innovative. It seems almost entirely subjective. So it did surprise me that it went down the way it went down. In general, I find having worked on lists for so many years and so many years ago, I am impressed by the longevity and the stamina that lists have in terms of the currency that they still hold. I can't believe people are, and I know people today who ask me, how do I get on this list? The under 30 list, how do I get on those lists? And I'm always amazed that they matter as much as they do. But, they are in a world of noise when you're just bombarded by information and shilling and PR. They sort of stand out as, very readily understood by most people.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess that's what it is.
Well, it's a construct that we're accustomed to from our earliest years, right? What is your rank in the class? What is your rank in, we in sports, are you first place, second place? I think we have created this from our earliest days, this sense of worth tied to a number or a rank. And it feels very easy to understand. It also feels like something that we all aspire to, because that becomes the, that's like on the LinkedIn profiles, and it's like 30 under 30, and people always tout it. And I'll be honest, if I'm on a list, I promote it too. You're proud that someone is validating what, you hope you think about yourself. But there is always, I think, that question of the underlying methodology, because it's easy to just put people in on a list, and if you see the lack of diversity, if you see maybe the negative social impact of a list that's saying that all innovative people are, men and predominantly white men, then you kind of like, well, what is that? What are the other implications and impacts of that type of story?
Yeah, it was really a low moment, I thought.
All right, so you have this really interesting career where you spend some time in similar spaces, but very different. Lifetime from Forbes, from Refinery 29. I imagine that's a very different voice and different environment. Now you're in entertainment. Were those shifts, some of them smaller, some of them bigger, was that scary to you? And how did you navigate that?
They were very scary. And in each time I had been warned by people that I was making a huge mistake and that I was potentially killing my career. So on the one hand, you had, folks, I can vividly remember when I told my managers at Forbes that I was leaving to go work at a women's magazine. You can only imagine the reaction that elicited. That was wild. And then so there, that's hard, because you begin to doubt whether taking a risk is really the right risk to take, and is it worthwhile. But then there's also just the boots on the ground fear. When I got to Marie Claire, one of the first pieces of feedback I got from something I had edited, an editor said, "This is great, but I can't tell if a man or a woman wrote it." Which I thought, I'll always remember that, because I thought it was so spot on. She said, "We are a women's magazine with a very clear women's voice, and I can't tell that a woman wrote this." And I thought, you know what? That's pretty smart. I spent 10 years working in an organization where I probably worked with 2 or 3 other women. There weren't many women in this newsroom at Forbes. And so it had sort of colored my voice. I had been denuded of anything that made my writing feminine, I guess you could say. I don't know what that really, like, not to say that there's feminine writing, but that whatever voice I had was, I think, devoid of voice. It was just sort of neutral, that there wasn't any color to it. And I thought that was a very useful piece of feedback. So there were other muscles that I had to get into shape to work at Marie Claire. I think every point along my career has been for a reason. I am a religious person. I'm a person of faith. And so I do think that that all these steps were important, that they were serving a reason. And part of the reason I had to go work with women was because I had to go work with women. I had to know what that experience was like. And what's so fascinating to me in hindsight is that for most of my career outside of Forbes, I had the tremendous privilege and benefit of working only for women, for women and with women. And not a lot of people can say that. I have benefited from having very strong women bosses in my life. Joanna Coles, Nancy Dubuque, Alyssa Mastromonaco, Amy Emmerich, people with very clear points of view, women who were assertive, women who walked into a room and owned that room. And I learned a lot from that. I've had some like pretty impressive female authority figures in my life, and it's, I think, imbued me with a certain confidence that didn't come naturally to me. I think most people, it always surprises people to hear that that I suffered from imposter syndrome earlier in my career. I just never felt like I was smart enough to be in a room. And then to be around those women in particular and to just have them, take the mic, take the room, make the choices they made, own those choices. It was really important stuff for me to learn.
I'm really resonating with those stories, and in part because I don't think leaders oftentimes, or managers, or anyone with that position of authority, understand the impacts they do and can have on those within an organization. And oftentimes, wherever you are in your career, you're still looking upward, and you're still focused on, if it's the shareholders, investors, customers, media partners, like the senior leadership above you, but the impact you have on those who work with you and around you, and lead through your example, can be really powerful. And so just hearing you talk about these women and how you saw them and the example that they set for you, and then how that's inspired you, is just something I wanted to call out, because I do think it's really important that we lead for others and we think about the impact we have on them, the example that we're showing, and how to lead authentically in a way that's you, right?
I had never been to it sounds ridiculous, but I'd never been to a brainstorm meeting until I worked at Marie Claire. It was just not the way we worked at Forbes. Now, whether that was, specific to that organization or what, but it was the idea was that you would be collaborative. You were part of a group, and the more minds we could put together, the better the idea, the stronger the input. That was wildly unfamiliar to me. I was used to me and my computer. We were best friends. And so bringing in other voices was hard for me, and probably I wasn't the best colleague in those years. But I've learned the value of that. And then I brought that to an organization, like Refinery, where I was very often the oldest person in the room. And so what does that do to that process? And what, how can you empathize with women who are going through something different than you are, but maybe you have wisdom to impart? And how do you do that in a way where everyone feels like they're part of the process?
How important was your network as you were moving throughout your career, and especially now?
My network has always been vitally important to me. I really fully began to realize the power of it when I was at Marie Claire, because when I launched that at work section, it was the first time really a women's magazine, had devoted regular real estate to covering very accomplished women, C-level type women. And I understood quickly that this was an opportunity to network, that it was not just, getting women in the book, which was always, the goal, but to cultivate relationships that I'd always wanted. So the example that comes to mind is I remember very vividly the year Hamilton came out, and I was obsessed with Hamilton like the rest of the world.
I still am obsessed with Hamilton.
And I thought, well, how do I carve out something of this phenomena that I can make, Marie Claire's, that I can make my own? And I ended up meeting Jill Furman, one of the producers of the show, featured her in the magazine, and we still have a relationship to this day, which is proving useful as I head into I've written a one-man show, so she's been helpful in providing certain guidance. And I'm very, I would say, meticulous about maintaining my Rolodex, dropping people lines. Hey, what are you up to? Can I buy you a cup cup of coffee, just small interactions like that, but just to stay on people's radar. I think that not enough people do that. And I can say that because I've met many people over the years who don't keep in touch with me, so I know that it's not necessarily a priority for everyone, but for me, it's very much a priority. My contacts are very important to me. And also I like that at this stage in the culture, I can say, that we're all looking to accomplish what we set out to do. And there's no harm in tapping your network for that. I think men have been doing that for ages, the golf course, of course. So now it's time for women to do that. It doesn't always have to be, I find with women in particular, it's sometimes the default is, well, I don't have anything to offer that person. So what? So you have a mind, you plant seeds because maybe down the road they will yield flowers. It doesn't have to be immediate. It doesn't have to be instant. That's the value of networking, is you're looking at the long game. So my network is hugely important to me.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. I feel like we got to cover a lot of topics, and it feels like we were just networking, hanging out,
We were
chatting.
networking our faces off.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you. This was great. Thanks so much for listening to Ellevate. If you like what you hear, help a girl out. Subscribe to the Ellevate podcast on iTunes, give us 5 stars, and share your review. Also, don't forget to follow us on Twitter at Ellevate NTWK, that's Ellevate Network, and become a member. You can learn all about membership and all the great things that Ellevate Network is doing at our website, www.ellevatenetwork.com. That's ELLEVATE network.com. And special thanks to our producer, Catherine Heller. She rocks. And to our voiceover artist, Rachel Griesinger. Thanks so much, and join us next week.
Save big on select LG appliances at Lowe's. Right now, shop deals on top items like the stainless steel kitchen suite featuring a counter-depth refrigerator with extra large capacity and dishwasher that washes and dries dishes in just 1 hour. Plus, get free delivery when you spend $396 or more. Visit us in-store or online today to bring home LG appliances for less. Backed by Lowe's Price Promise. Exclusions apply. Exact products from qualifying retailers only. See Lowes.com for details. Offer ends 3/8.